Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and I wish to thank you also the Chilean Embassy in Norway for the kind idea and invitation to be part of this event. So I will be talking about industrial production of and utilization of macroalgae in Chile. The photograph is a 21-hectare farm in the south of Chile that was placed almost a decade ago for production of bioethanol as a biofuel. But as I will tell you, that idea is technically possible, but economically has some strong restrictions. So in my talk, I will first have some inputs on algal exploitation and aquaculture in Chile. Then I will face some of the main bottlenecks that the industry faces today to come to some conclusions and recommendations. Well, aquaculture, and that is the statistics of FAO that were published in a paper in 2021. And in 2017, most of some of the top aquaculture products were seaweed, actually, and these 5 species makes up of over 26% of the whole aquaculture production in the world. And that is done mainly in Asian countries, Japan, Korea, China, Indonesia, most of them. But in the western part of the world, you see that in cultivated seaweed, in the light blue bars, has increased quite a lot, but wild collection is staying very even in about 1 million tons per year. But normally in our countries is the opposite way. That is the same happening here in Norway and in Chile, in which 97% of the production comes from fisheries, and only 3% in the Chilean case comes from aquaculture. The numbers are below there. And about seaweed farming, most of our production is Gracilaria chilensis, as a red algae for agar production, which makes over 99%. Macroalgae, a brown algae, is coming up, but still only 1%. And there are other species that are still under very small testing scales. Normally, we have a lot of seaweed resources that we are exporting, and we have an industry beyond that for several of these species for different type of products. The most important is carrageenan from red algae. The largest bars is the carrageenan production, and below is the exporting value of carrageenan. Second is agar, also from red algae, and propylene glycol from brown algae is the third one. All the other products is much lower. And that makes a business that is more or less $500 million per year. But aquaculture in Chile is growing over the years. Perhaps during the last years, not so much, but in these last two decades, salmon aquaculture has grown, mussel aquaculture has been growing, but seaweed aquaculture is decreasing. Seaweed aquaculture, you can see it there in the low right picture, a Gracilaria farm in the south of Chile. And but Gracilaria production is going down, and that is mainly because of market conditions. Market is the driver, demand. And as my previous speaker was telling, is the problem is that we do not demand seaweed as food, as is the main demand that happens in Asian countries. Here are some pictures of how Gracilaria is being culturing. Low technology, not much investment. Actually, for kelp, you need more technology and you need some more value-added products to make this happening. Let's go to the bottlenecks. Why drivers do not move on? And the first for me is economics. And this is real data from this 21-hectare farm that was established in mid-2000s. And here is the net previous value that you have. And that is against now correlated with productivity and the selling price, the value of the wet ton. If I show you the actual value of seaweed biomass, $90 per wet ton in the beach, so not very high, and actually a very conservative number of productivity, and we are at the breaking point. So I cannot convince any investor with these figures. But actually, if we have some new industry installed for production of new products, and they are willing to sell about over 150 US dollar wet tons, which starts to make the business much more interesting. The second bottlenecks, regulations. Normally, we are also salmon, mussel farmers, animal farmers, but in our aquaculture regulations are made for those type of aquaculture. And aquaculture of seaweed is a very different business with different use of the environment, so the regulations do not fit. And one point, just to mention, if you have a salmon farm, you are using the volume, as a previous speaker told you, no? You are using the volume. But with seaweed, you depend from light. And light disappears very rapidly with depth. So you cannot use the volume of the seawater. You need space, you need area, large areas to produce seaweed. And actually, that makes the business very different in how you use the space and adjust the regulations with the regulations for seaweed aquaculture in place. Now that makes it very different. And also biosecurity indications are that we require different type of biosecurity systems to allow a secure production of seaweed. Third bottleneck, we need to recognize in our regulations, in our economics, the environmental services that seaweed provides. From an IMTA position, that was just described now, we have long time demonstrated in early 90s that seaweed farm, like this Gracilaria, when are nearby a salmon farm, you have a much higher production in the red circle. And that seaweed has a much higher nitrogen protein content. And the first bar is when you install the seaweed near a salmon farm. But the second bar is a seaweed installed at least 1 kilometer from a salmon farm. So the seaweed is sensing the increase in nitrogen even 1 kilometer away from the salmon farm. Here are the number of concessions in area that have been licensed in Chile during the past years. That this is updated to 2025. A total area in aquaculture is over 30,000 hectares. Number of current aquaculture licenses are over 3,000. And mollusks have the largest area. Second, salmonids. Seaweed are in green, not so large because the production is going down. But you see that green and yellow bar, which is a mix of seaweed and salmon, is appearing during the past years. And that means that we are starting to see a cooperation of seaweed and salmon farming in the country. The fourth bottleneck, productivity enhancement, which means strain selection. One difference with terrestrial agronomy is that we do not have really domesticated seaweed in the sea. We are working with wild phenotypes, and if we go to the classic examples, how a corn was shaped 1,000 years ago, this size, and what we have today because of strain selection makes a huge difference. So here we see these are some crosses between populations. Back in the below, you can see one strain that have grown in the same site at the same time with those in the top left figure. And that makes only what type of crosses you did in the lab to have those different results. So we are still facing this constraint. In China, Japan, they have advances with some species, but we need to do it with our species that we have in our countries. Fourth constraint, productivity enhancement and pest control. As you know, with salmon, different seaweed, they have diseases, they have to deal with different type of organisms. These small amphipods can eat in few days, increase the abundance, and make your farm disappear. So how do you control these organisms? Maybe the learning about sea lice and how to control it is something to do. Here is a gracilaria. You cannot see it because it's overgrown by different other seaweed, epiphytes. How do you control those epiphytes? So when people say seaweed do not require pesticides and fertilizers, stop. When you have fertilizers, for example, inorganic products coming from the salmon, you increase the production. So you require fertilizers. You will require fertilizers in many places. maybe if you are using a eutrophied place, you can have a remediation. But if not, not. And you will need to deal with this stuff. And I should say, I'm against to use pesticides and to control that in large areas in the sea. No, it could be very dangerous. My fifth bottleneck, and the last one, is capacity, infrastructure, R&D. We need to move into more technology, higher technology. That is our hatchery, part of our hatchery in the south of Chile. That requires investment for starting up. And R&D is taking place in Chile. Here is the figure how scientific production is going up in seaweed sciences, but the line below is rather stable and is related to the production of science related to seaweed aquaculture. And here you see the frequency of papers published on different aspects of the uses of seaweed and cultivation of seaweed. Bioremediation has been one of the very common studies themes, production biology, understanding the biology of the species, but many of these processes, other processes to produce novel products with higher value, requires a lot of more attention in the country. So in conclusions, we need to have a new product targets to increase demand and value of our algae. We need to increase productivity to improve the ability to cope with losses. We need to have strong environmental regulation or stronger on regulations, monitoring, internalization of environmental aspects. And I will say novel environmental regulations besides those that are for animal production in the sea. We need to increase investment and R&D to improve production and processing systems, and we need to modify the regulations to promote the cultivation of algae, as they have several positive effects on the coastal environments where we can cultivate it, and where it has been demonstrated in Oriental countries that is technically possible to have large-scale seaweed cultivation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. And to me, at least, that was a real eye-opener to how complex the seaweed industry is as well. But again, you also, as well as Silja, touched upon the benefit of integrated farming. So I think if this I know it's not a new industry, but it's kind of new in Norway. So I think the conclusion here must be to learn from and work together with other parts of the aquaculture industry and across countries as well. How do you see that happening today?
I think it's very possible. Myself, I have been involved with interactions with researchers from most of the seaweed aquaculture countries, and I think that is well possible. And actually, I hope that this trip helps to a stronger collaboration between Norway and Chile in this sense. There is several points that we have different species, but I will say the problems that we are facing are rather very similar.
We have the opportunity now and some time before lunch to open up for questions to Alejandro. There's one in the back there.
Thank you very much for your interesting speech. You talk about collaboration. Is there a possibility to collaborate with the people from terrestrial animals? Seeing there has been quite a lot of discussion how algae can reduce CH4, for example, in dairy.
Yeah, of course, those things can be established, and there is work in several places around the world on that topic right now. So there are several products that have shown the properties to reduce methane production in cattle production, for example. Now the tests are required to show that not only methane production is good, but also that you do not have collateral effects on other type of issues in your products. No, for example, in the milk production, the milk will maintain its quality when you use add seaweed into their diet.
Any more questions? You mentioned also, Alejandro, that there's a challenging market, and actually the demand is not really there for seaweed products. My impression was that was rising because we have seen and been told that, okay, seaweed can actually, for instance, replace plastic in packaging, and it can replace other sources of ingredients in the food we eat,
Yeah.
and so on. So
Yeah, I will say the main issue is about the type of products that will pay for your cultivation. If you are talking about plastic, that is also a low value product. Like the case that I was talking about bioethanol. We can produce bioethanol. We can transform this biomass that is rich in sugars in bioethanol. You need a different process that is not the same like transforming maize or any other terrestrial vegetable, because the sugars are different. But you can do it. But you cannot make a business with bioethanol. You cannot make a good business with bioplastic still. No, because the bioplastic that have been produced from seaweed are lower value bioplastics,
yeah.
not the more resistant ones and so on. So you need to create a value added. And for that, I think there are different strategies to face. What we are facing is that we have a more integrated use of the biomass. The polysaccharide industry that exists here in Norway use 30, if you have a good source of seaweed, maybe 40% of your biomass for the production of alginate. And 60% of the biomass are residues.
Yeah.
But there is the proteins, are all the other valuable products on that. But the processing of alginate destroy the protein and destroy many other. So you need to change the processing.
Yeah.
And we are facing that in this moment in our country.
Okay, so you would say we're still in a development phase, and we need to create products at a price point that is competitive to the alternatives we have in the market today to make this industry really bloom. Yeah. All right, but isn't that an encouraging... We have another question here. Encouraging message to all of us, I would say.
Thank you. One very important point. We've been researching the industry. One of the issues, I mean, there is almost on Earth no other crop that can provide benefits to so many aspects as much as seaweeds. Let's agree to that. Environment, food, bioplastic, climate, everything. The bottleneck that until now how about to make it profitable, to go for scale? You go for a project that is 1 million ton, fully integrated biorefinery production, A to Z. If we look at it as a farming business alone, it won't work.
No.
You need a scale, a project in Norway that produce 1 million ton, fully integrated, where everything will work that way, then it will be profitable. Carbon credit on one side, the bioplastic, 65 million tons of bioplastic every year in the ocean of plastic. Let's help that problem, but you need a scale.
Yeah.
So let's pass this message. You need a scale, fully integrated, that will work.
Yeah. But then you need to convince authorities in your countries that you will need not a few hectares of sea, you will need thousands of hectares. And that is a change about the regulations and how you see how seaweed business needs for development. It's a different world. Yeah? Different. So I will say, and I fully agree with your comment, you need to integrate. You need to see the full chain, not only the aquaculture. We are pushing that aquaculture will push the demand, and that will not happen. No, we are not eating like in the case of the Oriental countries, the seaweed.
But if you integrate the value you put on the environmental services that the
And you can value
seaweed
those
is
services.
providing, exactly, and integrate that into the value chain, and also
Yes.
there is a growing market for carbon credits. So put these puzzles, pieces of puzzles together.
And you can reduce some cost.
Yeah.
For example, we are now with the company in Chile calculating how a farm can add in oxygen that they need to add, and that is a cost for the company, with a salmon farm, with a seaweed farm, adding oxygen for them for free.
One final question here from the audience.
I'm a nutritionist, and I've always had an issue when people suggest that we can integrate seaweeds into the feed and food chain. When you have up on your slide that you can use seaweed as a bioremediation product, how can you guarantee for me as a nutritionist that the seaweed is not going to take up components out of that seawater that may be anti-nutritional factors in feed and food? It's
Yes.
one of the challenges.
Yes, you are fully right and correct. Seaweeds can take up heavy metals and many other products. And for that, in Oriental countries, they have very strong regulations measuring the amount of metals that they have in their food products. And actually, for some of them that they take up arsenic, for example, they say, well, you cannot eat more than 5 grams of these seaweeds per week. But that is very tasty for them, not for us. Tasty for Koreans, for example, Hitsiki, and they pay quite a lot of money for that product. So you're right. So you need correct values for your seaweeds. And when you are integrated with salmon, things can happen, but I will not say trace metals will be the main issue there. Mostly you can think about copper, perhaps in using as in the defouling paints and so on. But we have measured copper, and it's not in our seaweed. But you will need to control that, okay? You don't control the fluxes of water, so your pollutants can come from other places also, no? And
I just feel you've got more opportunity with industrial uses.
perhaps, yeah, perhaps. But we are looking about the Oriental countries now, that model, and well, they're eating. Why we do not eat the seaweed? But normally in our country there is a tradition of eating two species of seaweed. Okay, a brown algae and a red algae. That is traditionally for 100 years. They're finding that the populations from 15,000 years ago was using seaweed in their food. 15,000 years ago. But that when you give seaweeds to our kids, for example, they will say, hey, that do not taste well, no? So the consumption in the country has gone down, and it's a very low value product as food in our country. So that will not pay for.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, and thank you for great questions.